All right, everybody, happy week 6 to you. This is FSM Football Sunday Live with Ben Heisler. I'm the Director of Media Operations for Fantasy Sports Markets, and of course, joining me each and every Sunday morning for the next hour or so, one of the best fantasy analysts in the country. You hear him on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio every Saturday morning for Wake Up Fantasy Sports. You also read his outstanding work over at Fantasy Alarm. And did you know that NBA is coming? This is an exciting time because Justin Fensterman is here. What's up, buddy?
That's right. You know what, Ben? It's Tuesdays, the NBA is starting, but right now we got to focus on Week 6 because people's seasons are on the line, and that's why from the daily side of things, it keeps you in the fantasy game, and we're going to pick some winners today for some people.
As well, we should. Before we get to a lot of the injury news and notes, a couple things that you guys should keep an eye on. First, if you are watching us on Facebook Live, if you're watching us on Periscope, on YouTube Live, thank you so much. There is a little thing right below. It says, send in your lineup questions. We want this to be an interactive show. We want to go back and forth, have a conversation with you guys. I already see one question coming in from our guy Seth over on Periscope. Thank you, Seth. You are getting the ball rolling today. So we are here for you guys. We want this to be a back and forth show. That's thing and item number one. Item number two is for those of you guys that have not played at Fantasy Sports Markets yet. I'm not sure what you're waiting for. Up on the screen is a promo code. It says NFL18. You type in that promo code after you register at fantasysportsmarkets.com. That is $5. That is a gift from us to you. There is no deposit required. So get in. I just tweeted about 10 minutes ago at Benny Heis that there is a bunch of overlay on Fantasy Sports Markets right now, meaning that if you go to our site, you have an opportunity to basically get some free money. There's a lot of money up for grabs right now, and the fact that our contests have not filled, a lot of times they start to maybe fill up a little bit late, but if you get in early, that gives you a really good opportunity to cash in. Over $200,000 is up for grabs this week at fantasysportsmarkets.com. So that is the news from us. Fensty, what is the news around the league before we start answering your questions and breaking through the slate?
So we're going to have to figure something out with the Minnesota situation, and that's with Dalvin Cook, Adam Schefter coming out saying he's expected to play in this Week 6 game versus Arizona. But here's the problem. Snap count. And we saw this a few weeks ago. And what happened? He didn't really do anything. So this is a big decision you're going to have to make, whether or not you want to play him. We may need to bench him after what we saw a few weeks ago because they will go in the air a little bit more. There are other options there. Murray is there as well, even though they're not even fully utilizing him. So that's something that you're going to have to consider. Now, the problem is, Ben, unlike normal weeks, we're in bye weeks time. This is now where buys are happening, so a lot more pressure being put on these running backs that you have that you expected to start. And for those that don't have as much depth, Dalvin Cook, if he's going to be on an actual snap count, we could be seeing a repeat of what we saw a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's a problem for Dalvin Cook, and something that I've gotten a lot of questions about today. And again, the matchup is solid. You know you can run on Arizona, but anytime there's a snap count reference, anytime you know that there's somebody that's going to be a player that they're going to need down the stretch. Like the NFC North at one point was considered to be a cakewalk for Minnesota. I still think they're the best team in that division, but why try and use him up against Arizona this week when you know you're going to need him down the stretch? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No. And so at the end of the day, I would start even, and I don't want to say look on the waiver wire if you don't have depth, but you're going to have to consider it. Now, luckily, there are other running backs who we didn't think would play that are now looking like they're going to play. For instance, Isaiah Crowell looks like he's going to be giving it a go after a huge Week 5. And so for all those Bilal Powell owners out there, especially during bye weeks, we're going to start him. You can still start Bilal Powell, because Bilal Powell is still getting enough snaps. He's getting enough carries. It's kind of like the situation right now in Philly with the Eagles where you have Corey Clement, who will be active in the passing game, but still you're seeing Wendell Smallwood involved. It's the exact same thing in this situation. So still with Powell owners, don't be discouraged because both of them have a good matchup today. But yes, Powell definitely has the edge when it comes to carries for the Jets' run game.
Yeah, and Powell was somebody that I loved today in DFS, especially if Isaiah Crowell wasn't going to go in that home matchup against the Indianapolis Colts today. And that's a game that I actually think might be a little bit more high-scoring than people would anticipate. I think both quarterbacks, in particular Andrew Luck, even on the road, is going to have a big game today. So that's something we can get into coming up in a little bit. Any other news and notes before we start diving into lineup questions?
Yep, let's talk about the Patriots for a second here, because even with the Patriots, I don't rely on them too much because of the lack of consistency, but Sony Michel expected to play. Also, Chris Hogan expected to play. Same with Rob Gronkowski. Gronkowski and Josh Gordon. So all systems seem to be a go, Ben, for the New England Patriots. So just remember that when you're setting your lineups, especially with it being bye weeks. Sony Michel in a very interesting spot, but James White is still there.
Yeah, I think James White might have one of the best matchups on the slate today. I think Julian Edelman is absolutely in play. It's a fascinating game, especially being in the Kansas City area. I think there's a lot to discuss. All right, questions coming in. I see some from PD Dubs. I see them from Bryson and a couple others. We will get to you guys in just a second, but first let's start with Seth. Is Tevin Coleman a must-start with Devontae Freeman out? Quick answer, I say absolutely.
Yes, he is, but at the same time, Ben, we need to know what his other options are. That's why we need to know. When you're asking us these questions, we need to know what your other options are so we don't steer you wrong. But with Freeman out, Coleman, I want to see a little bit more production, and this is a good week for it because one thing we've seen with Atlanta, enough production to go around. So I'm thinking Coleman, and he'll also be a little bit active in passing game too, which I think will be very strong for Atlanta. So yes, but again, we need to know your other options.
Correct. Like you're not benching Todd Gurley for Tevin Coleman this week, and he's a fantastic DFS play for sure. Especially if you're looking on the salary sites, I think he's a great option. At fantasy sports markets, I think you can throw him in a lineup or two, especially if you're going to be stacking that Tampa Bay Atlanta game. But yeah, the other options are always helpful here. But I certainly look at Tevin Coleman, particularly on a daily level, as a great start today. And Tampa Bay's defense is atrocious, and I know they've had a bye week to try and correct some things and figure a couple outs. One other note on Tampa Bay, by the way, you know how you can run all over the Atlanta defense and you can use running backs that can catch the ball all over Atlanta? Dirk Cutter, I believe, on SiriusXM NFL Radio said that Peyton Barber remains the #1 running back, had a really good week of practice. I don't know if I feel comfortable yet, Fensty, on a site like Fantasy Sports Markets to throw in a lineup with Peyton Barber, but if you're taking a dart throw somewhere in season-long leagues and you need a running back to pick up, he's still the #1 back, and he's still the starting back, especially in this type of matchup. It's not going to get any better than this.
A few of our analysts on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, Ben, have said that this could be the week where Ronald Jones scores his first touchdown of the game. Now, the thing with Ronald Jones going into the season was that he didn't know the playbook, and that's not a good sign. But now he's had a few weeks to acclimate himself in there, and what we've seen from Peyton Barber, which is pretty much nothing, now Ronald Jones is a serious look. So for those that are on salary sites, that's something for DFS you want to consider if you're going to be going stars and scrubs. So just remember that, but I don't mind your philosophy, because if you want to invest in the Bucs run game, the bottom line is if people are saying that Ronald Jones is going to score, and still with Peyton Barber with the comments that you just made, invest in the Bucs run game this weekend.
Yeah, if there's going to be a time to do it, it's now. And then if there's somebody that's desperate enough for running back help, you can move one of those guys over, knowing that we just don't know what the committee is going to be like from here on out. One other question from Seth Fensty. He wants to know, is Greg Olsen someone worth trusting today in a half-point PPR, or should he stick with somebody like Vance McDonald? Go ahead and give your answer, because I know what I would say.
Right. Now, with Greg Olsen, I'm thinking if he's going to play, he has a good chance to score. It's a good matchup for him. But even the position as a whole, right now it's looking like he is going to play. That was a little bit questionable. I'm actually looking up injury news now on him, and reports are that he is going to play. So that is someone to take a dart throw up, especially in bye weeks.
I like him too. I love the matchup for McDonald today, and I think he's maybe a better DFS play. I think Olsen might be a little bit more consistent in season long. So it's sort of a two-part question there. For you, Seth. I think I'm going with McDonald in a lot of fantasy lineups this week on the daily side. Season long, though, you know Greg Olsen is always going to be an integral part and someone that Cam Newton is consistently going to be throwing to. So good luck. Thank you for sending in your questions. Let's go to PD Dubs. PPR League, it's a toss-up between another Carolina receiver, Devin Funchess, and a guy that we both talked about in love last week, and he delivered for us, Mohamed Sanu. So in that toss-up, Fensty, Mohamed Sanu or Devin Funchess in a full-point PPR, who would you start there?
Man, as much as I like Sanu, and I'm still going to go with him again, I'm actually going to go with Funches in this answer. Sanu, remember, a bit banged up with, I believe, a hip injury all week long, so his status was in question for a bit. He is good to go today, and I do like them. I actually do think it's going to be a huge Julio Jones week. So what I know, Ben, we talk about our top overall when it comes to each position, and Julio Jones has to be that guy this week. You want touchdowns, this is the week you're getting it. But I'm still going with Devin Funches. I feel like double-digit fantasy point scoring outings we've seen seen the consistency there. Now, even with Greg Olsen back, still not too many other options you can rely on. So with that, I am actually going to go with Devin Funchess today.
I'm going to go Devin Funchess too, but I think it's closer than most people would anticipate.
Right.
In games where the Falcons have had an over-under of higher than 50, Mohamed Sanu has been one of their better scorers in daily fantasy. He's put up consistent numbers. He gets targeted a bunch. And once again, this is one of the higher over-unders of the game. Also, the other component that I think we need to consider here is that when Greg Olsen plays, the snaps and the targets go down for both Devin Funchess and Christian McCaffrey. Olsen expected to play today. That goes into consideration as well. But Washington's coming off a short week. I think Washington will win today. But I expect both offenses to play well. I do. I think Washington's performance against the Saints was not indicative of how good their defense actually has been this year. And their offense will have some times. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that game because a lot of injuries for Washington going into this. Yeah, you've got Adrian Peterson, you've got Chris Thompson. Both of them are hurt. This could mean Capri Bibbs as a dart throw could be a decent option. But also Jamison Crowder, it's looking like he's not going to play. So that's a little bit of a problem. And Josh Doxson, come on, can we ever rely on Josh Doxson? So my problem with that, Ben, is that you think they're going to win, but what options are going to come through for them?
Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed gets like 15 targets today. And what type of society are we living in where Jordan Reed is the only healthy member of the Washington team?
It's like we're in a parallel universe right now.
Yes. Yeah, I do. Carolina just has these letdown moments, and I think I felt this way maybe towards the beginning of the week. I don't know if I can necessarily pick them to win right now, just saying it back again in my mind with all those injuries. So I might have to reevaluate that, but it'll be closer than people expect, and I do expect them to cover for whatever that's worth. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna reiterate one more time that yes, I like what you're saying, Ben, and I don't think a lot of people will be on the Redskins, but with the lack of options, I am a little skeptical.
All right, let's go to YouTube Live from Bryson. We have to pick two of these three guys, Fensty. It appears to be PPR. Shady McCoy, Chris Carson, and Carlos Hyde. So McCoy's got a tough matchup going on the road against Houston, but it was good to finally see him get involved consistently. That was the Shady McCoy that I think a lot of us have been looking for throughout the entirety of the season. The Browns have a home matchup today against the Chargers. It's a tough defense to run on for Carlos Hyde, but a lot of people have been happy with his volume. I still look at him as a sell-high guy in season-long fantasy. And then with Chris Carson, back-to-back solid weeks for him, finally getting himself involved and becoming an integral part of Pete Carroll's offense. And they are in London today to take on the Raiders. So between those three, if we have to eliminate one of them, who are you eliminating in full-point PPR?
I mean, I trust Hyde the most, Ben, of all these running backs. And
even though he doesn't catch the ball.
Right. Okay. I still trust him. I still trust him a little bit more. And I do, when it comes to Carson versus McCoy, it's very, very close. I'm actually going to go Carson over McCoy. So I'm feeling a little bit more confident in Carlos Hyde, despite what you just said. Okay. And also with Carson with the snap count, love that. With McCoy, I'm still not that excited just yet, so I'm taking McCoy out of that equation.
That's perfectly fine. It's a tougher one for me, only because I just feel like I still like the fact that Hyde is getting the volume and the rushing touches, and at one point, I think up until last week, he was leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns. I'll say this. I think your two picks of Carson and Hyde are the highest floor picks between those three. Would you agree?
Yes.
Now, the thing we also have to consider is if Buffalo is in garbage time, are they going to use McCoy to get a bunch of pass-catching situations, dump-offs in the flat, or are they going to take him out and use somebody like Ivory? That's something that we have to consider as well. So I would probably play Shady over Carson if I'm looking for a higher ceiling. If I want that high floor, I'm agreeing with you.
Right, and so at the end of the day, I mean, the matchup does not favor LaShawn McCoy.
Not at all.
I see where you're going with it, and I understand that you're a little bit worried with Hyde with the lack of receptions. I mean, when you talk about Cleveland, by the way, let's also talk about how Antonio Callaway is in a very, very big spot with Higgins out. So that's also someone that you should definitely look at for receiving options today. So from the daily side. And that's what we're going to try to do on the live stream. While we go over these questions, we'll expand it a little bit more and talk about the other options on the team and what we expect from them, Ben.
Exactly.
So I see what you're saying with LaShawn McCoy, and I know that we finally got to see Shady, aftermath right here. But at the end of the day, with LaShawn McCoy, it's just the matchup doesn't speak volume to me, whereas with Carlos Hyde it does. And Carson, after seeing that snap count and seeing that Rashad Penny's not taking over too much, I'm still going that direction.
All right, a couple of questions coming in. I see one from Andrew, one from Corey, Jay Squeezy over on Periscope, as well as Big Mike, who has returned to the show. Thank you, Big Mike, for your return back to the show on Periscope. Also, PD Dubs mentions that Tannehill might not start today. We can touch on that briefly. I don't think anybody was really looking to play Tannehill against the Bears defense anyway. But how does that affect the rest of Miami's offense? Kenyon Drake finally got it going last week, but it took him a while to get things going. Frank Gore has been very mediocre, and the rest of the receiving game has had a lot to be desired over the last few weeks as well.
I want nothing to do with this offense. The two offenses that, in my opinion, that are the hardest to tout, been saying this all week, Ben, Miami and Tennessee. Very, very frustrating. The lack of consistency. All of a sudden, once you think Kenny Stills has that chance to be the ultra number one option, boom, there's Jakeem Grant. Then it's like, okay, the Drake. You hate the Drake? You love the Drake. I don't love the Drake this year because Frank Gore is still there. Remember, this is a guy that had over 900 yards last year. So, yes, Frank Gore's been mediocre, but he's still involved, and they're still going to split carries. I can't trust this offense. And if they succeed and you go with a dart throw with them, fine. But that's not going to be me, Ben. No. I can't trust them until I see consistency.
I'm with you there, and they also are the slowest tempo offense in the NFL. So the good news for them is that they like to try and stay on the field, but the bad news is that it's like them in Dallas. At some point, you want more opportunities, you want more volume, you want more carries, and they just stay and they let the clock run down, and it's very frustrating if you have anybody on Miami on your team as a fantasy owner. So I saw that from PD Dubs. I think if anything for the Bears, especially if Tannehill doesn't play, puts Jordan Howard in a great bounce-back spot this week. I'm big on him this week. I really am.
I love him. I love him getting in the end zone twice, Ben. What do you think about that?
Jordan, I think it's perfectly plausible. One of the guys that I've been saying all week that I think gets 2 touchdowns today is Marshawn Lynch. Revenge game against Seattle in London. Which is a little bit different, but I think anytime Seattle travels away from their home stadium, their defense tends to let them down, and Russell Wilson has to throw a lot. I think this is not only a good opportunity for Doug Baldwin to bounce back this week, but just everything sets up really well for Marshawn Lynch. And if there's any coach in the NFL that goes with a narrative, man, it's John Gruden, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't John Gruden like full? Hey, Marshawn, I'm gonna tell you something right now, buddy. Okay, look at me. This is your moment. This is your opportunity to try and take it and stick it down their throat, okay?
I'm just going to go out there. I'm just going to go out there and eat Skittles.
Yeah. I hope he eats today.
Yes.
He eats plenty.
He'll be tasting that rainbow, Ben. Let me tell you.
From Andrew on Facebook Live, a PPR toss-up between Calvin Ridley and Tariq Cohen. So Ridley was a guy that was very popular last week. We told you guys to move away from Calvin Ridley and play Mohamed Sanu. But the matchup against Tampa Bay is very exciting if you're a wide receiver, regardless of where you are on the field. And Tariq Cohen going up against Miami also has a very favorable matchup. So this is a tougher one than I think most people would anticipate.
Right. I'm going to sit there and go with Calvin Ridley only because, and I talked about this last week with the over-under with Atlanta Pitt, and you saw it go over for a reason, and they're going to score some points there. And Atlanta didn't even do that well when it comes to point scoring. But with Calvin Ridley still being there and the fact that Mohamed Sanu is going to play, so they'll spread the ball around, even though I think it's going to be an amazing week for Julio, they're going to be throwing a lot. That's why I'm going with Calvin Ridley here.
I'm going with Ridley as well, even though it's a really good matchup for Cohen, and I think it has to do a lot with what we were just talking about.
Right.
If Miami doesn't have their quarterback and things just get off on a very slow offensive start for them, this should be a great opportunity for Jordan Howard to chew up clock, chew up time, get between 20-something carries. People were freaking out about Jordan Howard a couple weeks ago. He still had 11 carries in that game. Now, he didn't do much with them, and everybody else in the Bears' offense was able to succeed except for him. But I still look at Jordan Howard as being in a solid spot. Now, I think Cohen could still have a very good game. But if we're talking about between those two options and who sets up better for this particular match, you're right. I agree with you. It's Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, as long as the carries are staying in double digits, we don't have to worry about that. And right now, that's what it's still doing. So because of that, you got, and again, that's why I'm trusting Jordan Howard big time with this matchup for 2 touchdowns.
We'll get to Corey, Jay Squeezy, Big Mike, and my guy Hustlerama is checking in today over in Winnipeg. Good to have him there. I see a Felix Casey and Jeremy on Facebook as well, so we will get to all those. A couple other ones that I want to get to from earlier. There's a couple good toss-ups here from Seth between Corey Davis, Alex Collins, and Aaron Jones, half-point PPR. It's tough because Aaron Jones makes a lot of sense in that type of a matchup, but I just don't trust Mike McCarthy at this point. Alex Collins continues to be outsnapped and outtouched by Buck Allen, and again, another decent matchup for him. And then Corey Davis probably is the most upside out of anybody, but we were just talking about how frustrating that Tennessee offense is. I think in half-point PPR, I'm more likely to go with the more talented receiver out of all these.
Yes, and that's why, because he is the number 1 guy, and he's not splitting unlike the other 2. So as much as I want to go after Aaron Jones and thinks he has a decent matchup Monday night, it's still, that's not worth it to me. So in that, I'm going to play it safe, especially, again, like I said, we're in bye weeks right now. So again, and I don't like to use the word upside, and especially when talking about the Titans, but Davis is that number 1 guy, and when looking at all the other options, they're pretty much non-existent.
One other one from PD Dubs 101, do you go Greg Olsen or Eric Ebron in a PPR toss-up? I think with the targets for Ebron with Jack Doyle out, and I know that the Jets have actually been decent against the tight end position this year, I still have to look to Eric Ebron just because I know the volume is going to be there, and I simply don't as to whether or not it's going to be there for Olsen this week.
Right, and remember, Olsen coming off the injury that he hurt in week 1, so a very quick recovery for him. So if he comes back, he can injure himself right away. Now, we're not doctors. We're not in the business of predicting injuries, but we are trying to be logical thinkers in this case, and that's why we've seen Eric Ebron. That's why on salaried sites for DFS, his price point is going up, and even with the injuries he's faced this week, I'm still thinking he's going to be fed a lot of targets. That's the end of the day, Ben. That's what we have to expect. That's what we've seen, and that's what we have to go with. But I also, Ben, have to tell you that I love, especially with Hilton hurt, I love that both Ryan Grant and Chester Rogers also getting targeted a lot.
No doubt.
Now, on fantasy sports markets, these are guys that you're not using. But for seasonal, especially in bye weeks and on salary DFS sites, these are guys you have to look at. Ryan Grant, and I looked at the targets a little bit earlier, I believe 16 in the last 2 weeks. I'm thinking he's hitting the end zone against the Jets today.
Not only that, Chester Rogers has, I think, 11 targets in back-to-back weeks.
So there you go. And, I mean, those are 2 options that are prime right there, especially if you're worried about Ebron from the daily side of things.
By the way, speaking of the daily fantasy side, I'm going to throw that code right back on there for those of you guys that are just tuning in now. Promo code NFL18 when you guys go to fantasysportsmarkets.com. It is salary-based daily fantasy sports. And right now, at least as of the last 25 minutes when I tweeted it out, there's a bunch of overlay on our site right now, meaning if you get in, there's really good opportunities with a lot of these contests not filling up to this point, where if you get in, use that promo code NFL18 after you register over at fantasysportsmarkets.com. It's $5 on us. Throw it into one of the $5 lineups. If you want to do it in one of the $1 lineups for 5 weeks in a row, you can do that. Or if you want to play a $10 game, go ahead and use the promo code and do $5 your own. Either way, we're helping you out over at Fantasy Sports Markets today. From Corey, who's on the YouTube stream this morning. Hello, Corey. He says, in a half-point PPR fantasy league, do you go with Demaryius Thomas or Doug Baldwin today? I don't know whether, Fensty, you've checked the weather yet in Denver. There were reports earlier in the week that it was supposed to snow, and coming off a week where Demaryius just continues to frustrate fantasy owners, the Rams, into at least their advantage against Demaryius, their corners are not 100% healthy, and you don't have to worry about Chris Harris because he's going to be lining up in the slot, and that could slow down Manny Sanders. So maybe is this a week and a bounce-back week for Demaryius Thomas, or do we look at somebody like Doug Baldwin who's going up against a bad Raiders secondary and feel better about it?
I think the conservative play is going Baldwin, and I know he had a quiet previous matchup. I know it was very quiet and very disappointing, barely targeted. So because of that, when thinking about it, if you want to play it safe, you're still going to go with Baldwin. But I think this is a good chance, like you said, especially with the health factor, taking that into consideration. I think Demaryius Thomas, we've been waiting for this big weekend. I don't fully blame Demaryius Thomas because Case Keenum has underthrown him, overthrown him. Like, he's been open. And
should have beaten the Chiefs in week 4.
Right. right, and that's a perfect example of a difference maker of fantasy points, of him having an amazing week versus a mediocre week, which we've seen. So because of that, if I'm fine with you if you want to go with Thomas there. I'd almost rather go Thomas thinking that there's a chance that he breaks out. Whereas with Baldwin, I don't know if this is a sign of things to come. And also, you were talking about Chris Carson early. They're really Seattle utilizing their run game a lot. So with that, I'm going to probably have to go with Thomas today. I don't know what you think, Ben. Do you agree?
I think everything is relative, so I probably look at Demaryius Thomas in a more upside position than Baldwin, even though I think Baldwin is in a really good spot. I'm looking up a couple numbers just to make sure that I have Baldwin's snap count and target rate there. It was disappointing last week, and I know that it's an opportunity to bounce back this week if you're looking for value on the daily side, but I'm with you. I think in this matchup, when Denver's going to have to score points to win, Demaryius Thomas is probably the way to go. From Periscope, Jay Squeezy, is David Moore poised to break out? We were just talking about Seattle, Fensty, and David Moore had 2 touchdowns last week, a guy who's seemingly coming out of nowhere. I still feel like I need to see a little bit more, but depending on sort of Seattle's outcome, and in a pass-heavy matchup likely against Oakland, I know we just talked about Chris Carson's opportunity to run the ball, but are you looking at David Moore as saying, all right, maybe this is something that you stash away and use down the stretch because maybe they're going to try and get him the ball a little bit more frequently?
Yes, but if we're talking about this matchup, I can't start him over regular receivers that we've seen come through. So, that's what you were alluding to earlier. But if you want to stash him and then you start to see a little bit more consistency, because think of it like this as well. We saw 2 touchdowns from LeGarrette Blount. You're not going to now prioritize LeGarrette Blount over your RB1s. It's the same kind of thing there. So with that, if you want to stash him, that's fine. Starting him this week, though, but season long, I can't trust that. Big
Mike, I'm going to get to your question in just a second, but my guy Andrew Patterson, the outstanding talk show host over at TSN 1290 in Winnipeg, who I do weekly hits with every Wednesday at 2:30. He weighs in. He says, what does the 2 to 3 inches of snow in Denver do to your thoughts on the Rams' offensive plays today? So we were talking about Demaryius Thomas and how it still sets up well for him. Snow in particular doesn't bother me. It's like rain. It's when it gets really windy when you start to throw a lot of the projections out the window. Now, having said that, I think Jared Goff has also been playing in really good weather throughout his entire career. I trust his coaches. I trust his offensive coordinator. And you have to look at his development over the last couple of years and say, this dude has made enormous strides and that he can handle a lot of the adversity that's come his way because, man, he played for Jeff Fisher and it didn't wreck him. And now he's good. So do you worry about the Rams offense because of the snow? Because I worry about them with potentially Cooper Kupp coming back from injury and coming back from concussion protocol and Brandon Cooks being in the same situation. If they don't have all their playmakers, they're still a very good offense, but they're not necessarily elite. So how do you view them, A, from the snow, and B, with a couple guys potentially coming back from injury?
I mean, they're already utilizing Todd Gurley, and he's been a monster this year. They're going to utilize him a little bit more. That's what happens when you have the top running back, is you use them, especially in these situations as well, and also not having the ball in the air, slipping out of the hand and everything. But the same could be said, remember that. So how does the snow impact? Let's start with that. The snow does impact a little bit more for the second half for me. That's kind of how I view it because – and they have a lot of footballs, and they'll be dried and everything like that. But still, the whole slippery factor, I think it's going to be a little bit more impactful in the second half. So I'm not totally devaluing this matchup because of it. But when I'm looking at this game, I'm still thinking that even with their receivers ready to go, despite the concussion protocol, especially Brandon Cooks, I'm still thinking that Robert Woods can have a good day. If I can get 10 points from those Ram receivers and getting those targets, they're going to stick with their game plan. That's what's led to their success.
And by the way, for anybody looking for a value wide receiver, especially if Kupp doesn't play or if Brandon Cooks doesn't play, Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds is in a really good spot, got a bunch of targets late in the game last week. He's definitely in play should either of those receivers not go. So good question from my guy Hustlerama over in Winnipeg. Big Mike, 82 on the Periscope. He's been a frequent contributor to the show. Ravens or Chargers defense today. You have Baltimore on the road at Tennessee in what is likely going to be just a frustrating offensive performance. And then the Chargers Probably will give up a little bit more points on the road at Cleveland, but they also have more of an ability, I think, to take the ball away. So are you looking at a team that's going to try and have a lower scoring affair between the Ravens and Tennessee? Or do you look at the Chargers saying, all right, they might give up some points to Baker Mayfield. Jarvis Landry could have a big day across the middle of the field, but Mayfield will turn the ball over every so often, too. So where do you go here?
I'm actually sticking with the Baltimore Ravens. I just feel more comfortable doing it. And that's what the one thing we've seen with the Ravens is, and it's more, you know what, it's not even the Ravens, it's the Titans. I don't trust the Titans at all. That's the thing, Ben. And when I can't trust the Titans, I'm going to attack that team whenever I can. And I know we've seen sparks, but that's it. That's all we've seen. Whereas with the Browns, like I said, I think Callaway's going to have a huge day. Njoku, a report actually just came out that I saw that Njoku expected to be targeted more as well. So you're looking for a tight end in Daly to take a flyer on. That's someone to take a flyer on. I am sticking with the Baltimore Ravens here, more conservative approach.
I think that's perfectly fair. I know that there's occasional notes that West Coast teams, whenever they go out to the East Coast for those early start times, tend to struggle. Chargers didn't have a problem with Buffalo earlier, so I don't think they're necessarily going to struggle again against the Jets. And the Chargers are starting to get themselves right. I do think Baltimore is the better play here, but I think if you really wanted an upside play, Chargers are going to be able to get to Baker Mayfield a couple times today. I think the offensive pressure is going to be very good. But I will probably go Baltimore as well, even though I think the Chargers might have more of an upside. You just got to go, especially on the defensive side. Tennessee isn't going to blow you away with anything. Tennessee scores more than I'd love to find out what their implied total is, because it can't be much. Coming into today, the Tennessee Titans implied total is 19.75 points. Okay? Over-under is 42 in this game. Okay? Baltimore is the way to go. If you're a team with an implied total of less than 20, I think you feel fairly confident going there.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you too, Ben. And that's the thing. When I'm looking, there are three defenses that I'm always going to start pretty much no matter what the matchup is. Number one is going to be the Chicago Bears, who they're scary. Even when I watch them, I get the chills. But also you see Houston and Baltimore, two other defenses that I trust on a week-to-week basis as well. So it'll be very hard for me to choose any other options when those three are on the table.
No doubt. I see a question coming in from my guy Jeremy over on Facebook Live. It just says, mine is non-PPR. So I don't know if your original question, Jeremy, came in. So go ahead and resubmit it, because I want to make sure that if you spent some time with us this morning, that your question gets answered.
What player do you think he's talking about from the non-PPR standpoint?
That's a great question. I don't know. Let's go with Brandon Cooks versus Mike Evans.
Ooh. So in this game, because of the high total and because of the weather conditions, let's just say Mike Evans.
Let's say Mike Evans in this hypothetical situation that we just made up. So, Jeremy, if you're watching, go ahead and resubmit your question for us.
My PPR. That's not even. Was there a question mark at the end of that?
No, it just says in parentheses, mine is non-PPR.
Okay, so
he clearly submitted a question. It's just not showing up for me.
That is the hardest question we have received, or the hardest statement, and in parentheses that we've received.
And now it just says yes. Jeremy,
come on,
Jeremy.
That's
Jeremy,
even harder. Come on, man. The internet's
here it is. Here it is. Okay, now it's showing up. Tariq Cohen or Dion Lewis, non-PPR. Which is so funny because both of them are great PPR backs.
Man.
All right, this is a lot more helpful. Thank you, Jeremy. I feel a lot more confident knowing that we can give you a decent answer now.
I mean, Ben, based off what you were talking about before with Cohen's matchup, I mean, you're going to have to go with Cohen in that situation, right? Thinking that the Bears are going to utilize both backs.
Yeah, unless you think Tennessee's going to be trailing against Baltimore and then they use Dion Lewis out of the flat.
But every time we think they're going to use him a certain amount, it doesn't happen. That's the problem.
Well, here's the other thing, too. Do you trust either of these guys to get in the end zone?
Not really, to be honest with you.
In standard leagues, because that's where you're getting your points from.
No, but unfortunately, these are the options. So in parentheses, mine's not PPR. This is in parentheses, not ideal situation.
No, suboptimal. Suboptimal for you, Jeremy. But I think I agree with Fensty. We'll go ahead and play Tariq Cohen here.
Wait, parentheses. We still love your question, and thank you very much for tuning.
Yes, appreciate you, Jeremy, all the way from St. Louis, tuning in today. From A. Felix KC on Periscope, we have to pick one between Austin Eckler, he says Cooper, so I don't know if that's Cooper Kupp or Amari Cooper. We're going to go on the last name basis, Fensty, so let's just go with Amari Cooper. Jordy Nelson in a PPR flex. He can also replace Brandon Cooks for the Oakland stack.
Okay, so we're gonna have to dissect this like a frog in biology class for a second, okay? Because the options are between Austin Eckler and Amari Cooper, or some Cooper, right?
So it is Amari Cooper because he talks about the Oakland stack. So it is Amari Cooper.
Ugh, and it's just Amari Cooper. I'm seeing Amari Cooper get dropped in leagues, Ben. That's a bad sign.
He's got a good matchup today against Seattle, though. I wouldn't outright drop him. Although I was listening to a show where they were talking about the drop in fantasy leagues. I don't remember what it's called, but like someone was talking about how Jordan Howard has been dropped in some leagues, which I think is absurd. Like if you just have too many good running back options and you drop Jordan Howard, if you're going to do it, you want to do it on the Tuesday before waiver wire picks come out so that people just spend all their money on a guy that you don't want to deal with as part of your headache anymore. I don't know what that's called, but there's like a whole process behind it. Either way, don't drop Jordan Howard. Amari Cooper, I feel less strongly about.
Yes, no, Ben, I was just making sure, like, do not drop Jordan Howard. You are not dropping Jordan Howard. If you are dropping Jordan Howard, this better be...
I just traded Carlos Hyde for Jordan Howard. I'd sold high on Hyde, and I think Howard's going to be solid the rest of the year.
Yes, and we love him today too, Ben. But going back to that question, circling back, you go with Amari Cooper in the better matchup with Eckler. It's just, I'm always going to be scared to start Austin Eckler. You know, I know we've seen the snaps, and it's funny because one of their beat reporters, who I actually trust more than most beat reporters out there, Eric Williams from ESPN, actually came on our airwaves and said Eckler's going to have a role this year. You know, but the thing is, with still Gordon there and other options that they're going to go to, and still, I just fully can't trust that, especially when they're taking him, the second of the two running backs, versus Amari Cooper, who's the number one guy. That's why then thinking in terms of logic, that's why I'm thinking Amari Cooper is the answer there.
But is Eckler still the safer play?
Even
with that?
Wait, I think that the safer play is Amari Cooper here, you don't?
We've seen, I think at one point over the last, he's been better the last couple of weeks, and I know they've sort of let people down too, but at one point, Amari Cooper, I think in 6 out of 13 games had one catch. That's it. At least with Eckler, you know he's going to catch the ball. And the targets weren't good for Cooper true. Too. So I would disagree here. I think if you're looking for a safer play, it's Eckler because they've given him the volume, and I think they've used it because it's kept Melvin Gordon healthy.
Okay, I mean, the thing is with him as well, remember this, Ben, I mean, I'm looking in the last few weeks of how they utilized Eckler. I mean, 6 carries, 8 carries, 4, and you're seeing with targets only 3 apiece. Now, I know he scored the last 2 weeks, but still, he's only getting targeted 3 times in each matchup. That's the consistent factor that we're seeing.
That's fair. That's totally fair. But the crazy thing is sometimes that's more than Amari Cooper.
Right.
In this matchup, though, against Seattle, I think Cooper is probably the better play.
Right.
It's not good cornerback play.
I'm sticking. Now, Ben, if we're looking at more targets from Austin Eckler, now if I start seeing 6 or 7 and we're talking a few weeks from now, now that's a little bit of a different story, but they're not committing to him enough.
Correct. All right, so I think we're actually in agreement with Amari Cooper. And then you'd play Brandon Cooks over Jordy, correct?
Yes.
Okay, absolutely. All right, so hopefully that answers your question. Felix Casey, we know we dove around it a little bit, but I think we came to a consensus.
This is important. It's bye weeks. This is something that we have to consider. And when you're seeing, and we talked about this with the Jets situation, now we're talking about it with the Chargers situation, we need to also, by the way, talk about the Colts situation, because that is going to make or break for a lot of people as well, because you know, we saw Nyheim Hines come through, especially in the passing game. Now, a lot of reports saying that not only Marlon Mack's going to start, but eat into that production, despite the fact that he's played in just 1 game this year. So that's a very confusing situation, because now Nyheim Hines, at least to me, and I said this on Wake Up Fantasy Sports, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday, 6 to 8 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. I said that now I'm not fully benching Nyheim Hines just yet until I see Marlon Mack really eat in to Nyheim Hines. So I am just downgrading him from an RB2 to a flex option. So you're still starting the guy, at least in my opinion.
I'm with you there, too. From Josh Stein over on Periscope. Hello, Josh. He wants to know whether or not we should consider George Kittle as a must-start this week. I'm at the point where George Kittle is pretty much a must-start every week, especially with his former college teammate C.J. Beathard, who I just remembered. I was watching the Indiana game, banging my head against the wall and drinking myself silly yesterday. Because that's what they drive me to do. And I forgot that Iowa at one point was ranked number 9 in the country, Fensty, going to Indiana when Jordan Howard was on the team. And Indiana almost beat them, and then within the final seconds, C.J. Beathard completed a go-ahead touchdown pass to George Kittle for the win. Kittle's probably always a top 5, top 6 PPR tight end each and every week, especially with how often San Francisco has to play from behind. And they have a good matchup against Green Bay this week, and I fully expect him to play, even though he's got the questionable tag. So, I say if it's a season-long lineup, make sure that you have other options available. Maybe you put Kittle in the flex if you need to move him out for somebody else. But I always think George Kittle, if he's going to play, I feel good about him this week.
I do too if he does play. And also I feel good about him because of the lack of help with the other options for San Francisco. Now, this game being the Monday night game does make me nervous for what you just talked about before, but Pierre Garcon, I don't know if he's going to be limited or if he's not going to play at all. We still have to wait and see. And Trent Taylor, it's looking like he's going to play. So Matt Breida is a game-time decision right now. Matt Breida, that's a very scary situation right now because he's been doubtful all week. And now all of a sudden, we don't have an answer on whether or not he's going to play.
Correct.
So those who own Alfred Morris are right now up in arms because what happens if Breida plays? Do I prioritize them, especially being in bye weeks with fewer options? So with George Kittle, it does look like he's going to play from everything I'm seeing here, so it's fine. But really, I do like Kittle still because of the lack of other options when it comes to health.
Yeah, I'm with you there, too. Another injury question coming in. From Corey on the YouTube live channel. He says, I have Geronimo Allison, but do I risk him being out for Monday in a season-long league? I don't think you can play Geronimo Allison at this point. He's missed practice. He just hasn't shown any real signs or indication that he's going to play again on Monday night. And it's also a matchup that Green Bay doesn't really need him to win, so I would probably have somebody else ready to go.
Yep, I agree with that as well. Now also Randall Cobb in that exact same situation, Ben. So with that and it being the Monday game, that's tough because they're going to wait till the last second to make that decision,
exactly.
And you don't want to zero in your lineup, so you're going to have to play it safe, unfortunately.
Another Periscope question from Alex J. Maggard. Outlook on Jared Goff today with the weather. I have Jameis Winston on the bench. Ooh. Yeah, I think you have to play Winston here.
Yeah, me too.
The only situation, and sorry to cut you off, I'm in a league where quarterbacks get 6 points for a touchdown. And actually, let me throw this to you because I think it applies here. I'm in a league where quarterbacks get 6 points per touchdown instead of 4, but they also get -3 for interceptions as opposed to -1 or -2. The other component is that you get a half point for every completion and negative half a point for every incompletion. So I ask you, with that criteria, would you go with Jameis Winston or would you go with Andrew Goff? Or Andrew Goff. Andrew Luck. Because I am going with Andrew Luck in this situation because
Is it Goff or Luck we're talking about?
Andrew Luck.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a different situation here. I would still go, in that particular situation, I would go with Andrew Luck.
Okay, I would too.
And by the way, I mean, even with Hilton hurt, I still love Andrew Luck today.
I do too. Winston's got a dream matchup, but like with that criteria. But that's the thing. Like most leagues have these sort of weird rules that a lot of times we're not privy to. If you're just looking at pure daily fantasy, like if you're looking at fantasy sports markets, right, and you're like, okay, I want a quarterback. I think everyone's going to be on Matt Ryan this week. It's such a good matchup, or Brady or Mahomes. You can absolutely play somebody like Jameis Winston with a ton of confidence on the daily side, where interceptions really don't kill you.
Right. So with that, looking at Winston's matchup, if you're going to put him in that matchup today, today's the day to do it. And I think that he's going to be an awesome start today. So without those specific rules we were just talking about, Ben, I am going to go with Jameis Winston. But if there are all these contingencies, then I'm going to, again, have to play it safe with Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
Higher ceiling for Jameis Winston today.
No doubt. But I think especially with that criteria in play. So, yeah, I think between Jared Goff and Jameis Winston, I think Winston is the play this week.
Right.
Elgin says, let's talk about Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta Falcons. Well, we've been doing it, Elgin. I appreciate you weighing in. I don't know if there's anything specific you want.
I got it. Start everyone. Do it. Just do it. I mean, except the tight end situation, which is we thought was going to be Cameron Brate all the way. Because with Cameron Brate, it's been a little deceiving, Ben, because he's gotten touchdowns taken away from him via penalty this year. He's been marred by that, kind of like Austin Safarian-Jenkins was last season. But now
that guy burned me so much last year.
Every week. And I believe it was twice against the Patriots as well. So I think there is something a little bit fishy there. But this happened so many times. And because of that, now you're looking at this year, Cameron Brate's stats are deceiving because of it. So when looking at it now, well, the problem is O.J. Howard, which was expected to be not at all. Now all of a sudden, O.J. Howard's back in the mix. So we have a little bit of a confusing situation on our hands. So outside of the tight end situation, you're going to play everyone in this matchup. Because and when you look at these high over-unders, the teams that are highest of the week, they've been coming through, especially with the Falcons on the table.
Falcons and Chiefs games particularly have been crushing on the over-under.
Right.
And if I'm looking at it to see sort of where it's gone, this game has moved up about a point, gone back down a little bit. Right now, the live over-under is at 57.5 for this game.
That was the same total. That was the same one last week, I believe, with Atlanta-Pittsburgh, too. And then that, I believe that, thinking, on top of my head, I believe that hit 58.
It did, and that was with a frustrating offensive performance from Atlanta, especially in the second half when Pittsburgh's defense finally started to get their act together. So I'm with you there. Cameron Brate, I will say this. I still think he's worth a dart throw in daily. If you're desperate at the tight end spot, you can still use him today in your season-long leagues. Winston targets him a lot, especially in the red zone. 25% in 2016, 26% in 2017, and had that touchdown in Week 4 against the Bears for the Bucs' only touchdown of the game. So he's going to look in Cameron Brate's direction, and I think a lot of people will be off of him, especially if O.J. Howard plays, and they'll focus more on the wide receiver plays. I'm still going to have a little bit of exposure to Cameron Brate in daily fantasy today.
Totally fine with that.
From OG Killer 4, since it's snowing, should I still have concern about Emmanuel Sanders? We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but again, I still think Manny Sanders, based on consistency and volume, in season long, you're still starting him. And again, I don't think the snow is going to make that much of a difference. I'd be more concerned about the fact that not Chris Harris, who's shadowing him for the Rams in their slot corner. I'm blanking out on his name.
The bottom line is they're not good against wide receivers. That's one thing with the Rams, despite the fact that they're winning games. It's been a race.
Marcus Peters has been roasted in the last month.
Right. Roasted. So, the bottom line and the targets, I can't ignore double-digit target consistency, despite the weather factor. I just can't. And I also don't think that their run game, whereas with the Rams on the other side of it, they know they have Gurley, they can continue going to Gurley. But with the Denver side of it, still trying to figure things out with Lindsey and Royce Freeman, then, you're looking at double-digit targets once again for Emmanuel Sanders. So it looks like, Ben, if there's something that we can be consistent on from this show is we like the Denver wide receivers this week.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about considering how sputtering their offense has been. Do you look at this game from a standpoint of the Broncos can keep up with the Rams, or do you think a lot of these points are going to come in garbage time?
I think that they're going to keep up with them, but I think ultimately the Rams are going to win once again.
Yeah, the Rams are just too good of a team, and Vance Joseph right now, hearing reports that his name is on the hot seat, there's just a lot of potential confusion there. And he just doesn't seem like he has any sort of grasp of what's going on. There's a couple of games also that we really haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to get to this week. One of those, actually, we didn't. Occasionally, Fensty will recap games from the Thursday night game to see if there's any impact in the fantasy situation moving forward. Did we learn anything new from Philadelphia and New York other than the fact that Eli Manning can't throw a football anymore?
I mean, no, unless it's to Saquon Barkley at this point.
That's true.
That's about it. And it's really hard when I'm seeing Sterling Shepard put up single digits and hardly get targeted and not making plays. It's what you know what you're going to get with Odell Beckham Jr. He'll definitely be targeted. He's gotten paid big money for a reason, but you also know the attitude is going to come with it as well. So if there's something I did learn with Philly, though, it's that Corey Clement is going to be the guy with the higher upside than Wendell Smallwood. I know Smallwood, especially with Clement coming back and being on that snap count that Dalvin Cook is looking like he's going to be on in his matchup. I'm still thinking because of the receiving game, kind of like how I'm thinking with Nyheim Hines right now, I'm thinking the more productive back is going to be Corey Clement, regarding he stays healthy.
I think you're spot on there. As we have another 10 minutes left of FSM Football Sunday right here on the Fantasy Sports Markets Network. So if you guys are watching us on Facebook Live, if you're watching us on Periscope, on YouTube Live, we are here for you. Remember, the promo code, there you go, get a little queen wave in. Promo code NFL18, $5 over at fantasysportsmarkets.com. If you guys are new or haven't played at Fantasy Sports Markets yet, we are a non-salary based DFS site, meaning you can choose whatever team and lineup you want. You don't have to worry about how much a guy costs because you just plug them in and play and you go. It's never been faster. It's never been easier to put your fantasy lineups on the daily side together. And promo code NFL18 will get you $5 on us. Very easy to enter, and there's a lot of overlay right now over at FSM heading towards the final couple hours before lineups lock. Fensty, let's talk about the Sunday night game. And we haven't got a lot of questions yet, and I think part of the reason is because you're probably going to want to start everybody. I sort of look at this and try to say, okay, if I'm looking to be contrarian here and I still want exposure to this game, are you looking at maybe just going both of the tight ends instead of any of the wide receivers? Are you looking at maybe the running back plays, maybe going with Kareem Hunt and James White? Maybe Sony Michel is in play. So let's sort of start outward and then go inward with this game. Who do you like from this game in particular that you know you're going to want exposure to, regardless of whether you're being contrarian or not?
I know this is a big chance for Sony Michel, but until proven otherwise, I'm going to trust in James White, especially from the receiving game. I think, kind of like to reference Space Jam, one of my favorite movies, I think James White has taken some of Chris Hogan's talent, and because of that, and targets, and because of that, he now at this, and I for years haven't trusted the Patriots run game because they'll pull a fast one on you.
Right.
But James White has shown that consistency, and just because Sony Michel's playing, he is still a little bit banged up with a knee injury. So that's someone that we're going to have to trust, especially against Kansas City.
That's fair. Kansas City 31st in the NFL in rush defense. So far this year in fantasy, so you're going to be able to run all over him. There's been sort of some game theory that for New England, the best chance for them to win is to keep the Chiefs' offense off the field. So consequently, you would run Sony Michel a little bit more. Right. Maybe you do that as a contrarian play, and then you just sort of stay away from everybody else, just because Kansas City won't get that same amount of opportunities. But James White almost feels like one of the safest picks each and every week. We talked about it last week that I think he's the most underappreciated player in fantasy football because every time we think he's done, every time we think he's going to be completely out of this game script, that they're going to move on from him, he pulls you back in. So I look at James White and Julian Edelman and think these are probably the highest floor guys you can have in this game. But consequently, if we're talking about high ceiling, and this has to be the Gronk game, right? Like this is the Gronk game that I think we've all been waiting for.
Right. Right, yes, we know he was on the injury report. That's the Patriots thing, though.
Right. Every week, Gronk is going to be on the injury report.
Exactly. It's like, whereas with Will Fuller, he's actually on the injury report every single week, questionable every week with his hamstring. With Gronk, he's just there, but he's going to play.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying with that, Ben. So I actually think that outside of Gronk, who's always a trustworthy option, number 2 seed from the New England Patriots side is James White. But now I'm starting to think Michel a little bit more based off your game theory with this that you're talking about.
Well, I still prefer White because I just know how reliable he's going to be. But I do think Michel, he's 3 consistent weeks with, I think, 15 or more touches. He's still somebody that you can still play Michel and White if you wanted to together. Like, that's how much points are going to be scored in this game. The Chiefs over-under right now is at 60. Open at 57.5. Within the first 24 hours, according to Sports Insights, 93% of the public took the over in this game. And so that's what's caused it to go up to 60. There hasn't been a whole lot of late movement on it. I think 60 is sort of where everyone feels comfortable with this game being at. Would you take Travis Kelce over Rob Gronkowski if you had to choose one tight end in this game?
Wow. I mean, are we talking about salary implications or no?
Let's say...
We're doing Monday, Thursday contests, and there's salary implications, then that changes things a little.
Let's say you're making a fantasy sports markets lineup for today and for Monday. Just toss up Kelce or Gronk.
Man, very close there, but you know what? I'm actually going to go with Rob Gronkowski. Just think it's a safer option, and especially for those thinking the over, I'm thinking there's one thing we do know: Rob Gronkowski will get targeted. He is always top tight end, one of the top tight ends for a reason. I love Travis Kelce still. A little bit more trust in Gronk from that side.
From Nathan on Facebook Live, need a PPR flex between Nyheim Hines. Do I take the risk and wait on Alfred Morris in Monday night, or go with Demaryius Thomas in the snow? A lot of DT questions today, Fensty. Hines is going to get the targets consistently in PPR, so I feel good about that. Probably the highest floor option out of all three guys. Morris, especially if Breida doesn't play, is going to get a volume, but he doesn't catch a lot of passes in the backfield. I'm looking at it as sort of a toss-up between Hines as a high floor guy and Demaryius as a high ceiling guy. So where do you go between the two of them?
I'm actually going to go with Demaryius Thomas in this one. Even though, again, I'm still fine with starting Hines. He'll be in my flex in a lot of leagues this week, Ben, but still with Demaryius Thomas, like we've been talking about, thinking that both Thomas and Sanders will have a big week. We're going to go with Demaryius Thomas here. And also from the daily side, with the weather implications, people will get overly paranoid about it. So if you're talking about it from the daily side of it, less ownership, I think, is something that you're going to have to take into consideration when looking at the Denver wide receivers.
And then from Music and Nick on Periscope, D.D. Westbrook or Aaron Jones in the flex. Not sure whether it's PPR or not.
Okay, I'm going to go with D.D. Westbrook there against Dallas. It's an amazing matchup. A lot of wide receivers have succeeded on Dallas. I'm fine with that. Looking for a little bit, I thought that Blake Bortles was going to have a bigger week than he did, and so a little disappointed there, but still with D.D. Westbrook, the targets will be there for him.
All right, so there you go. Thank you guys for all of your questions. We've got about a few minutes left to go through some of our favorite daily plays of the day on fantasy sports markets. Remember, if you use that promo code, and I will put that back up on the screen, NFL18 for $5 on us at fantasysportsmarkets.com. Go ahead and register, and then when you sign up for your contest, if you type in that promo code, that $5 will come in for you. Really quickly, from Crown Arrowhead, Tariq Cohen or Adrian Peterson in your running back 2 spots. And Peterson's hurt, right? Like that's so it's Tariq Cohen.
Yes, by default.
Okay. Let's look at a couple quarterbacks. Let's look at it from the entire Sunday slate. The chalk plays of the day, Fensty, are going to be Mahomes and Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston. Deshaun Watson has put up really strong quarterback one numbers over the past 3 weeks. I think 3 consecutive weeks with over 375 yards through the air. They are using him in the running game as well. Unfortunately, it's going to get to the point where he's going to get hurt. But as long as he's still healthy now and he's probable to play, do you look at him in that same type of conversation this week, and who else do you like?
Not worried about the chest injury with him. I've been tracking that all week, and I'm fine with that. So, and my favorite when it comes to this, besides Hopkins, Will Fuller. I mean, they connect. They have great chemistry, someone that you have to look at as well. So even though they're a bit banged up with Deshaun Watson, the chest is still not a concern despite the tags that he's had with the injuries.
Absolutely. And Tre'Davious White likely to shadow DeAndre Hopkins. That doesn't mean you shouldn't play Hopkins, but Tre'Davious White's turning himself into a really nice corner in the NFL. I think Ben Roethlisberger absolutely is in play today as well.
We haven't even talked about that game, and he has a very good matchup there. Because I got someone in that matchup we're going to talk about in a little bit here who I like.
Okay, all right, so let's move on to the running back situation. Obviously, Todd Gurley remains the chalk running back over at Fantasy Sports Markets each and every week. It was him and Alvin Kamara until Mark Ingram came back, and I think a lot of people are still worrying about that too much for Ingram. But besides Gurley, Melvin Gordon in a really good matchup on the road against Cleveland is absolutely in play. You have Christian McCaffrey returning on the road against Washington, Zeke Elliott, James Conner, and Joe Mixon is somebody, too, that is basically going to get 100% of the snaps with no Gio Bernard this week. And, of course, we talked about our guy James White. Anybody we're missing that is an absolute must-play, an absolute must-consideration for FSM this week?
I love targeting against Dallas, and this is audition time for TJ Yeldon here to keep his carries up, especially if Fournette ends up coming back in their next matchup. So I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of pressure on TJ Yeldon today, and I think he's going to thrive against Dallas.
I love the matchup for Yeldon as well. My only concern about playing guys against Dallas is sort of like the situation that we have with Miami, how slow and meddling their offense is, and that takes away targets and opportunities. In this case, I still think Yeldon will get his, but I don't think it'll be as many volume plays as we would like it to be. That's my only concern. Understood,
but it's still overall, if we're talking players that have the good matchup, I'm still thinking, and again, the audition factor, we talk about things like revenge narratives. this is the time for Yeldon to prove himself that even when Fournette's healthy, he should be still getting those touches and targets.
Speaking of revenge narrative, Marshawn Lynch goes up against Seattle today in London. John Gruden's going to endorse the revenge narrative. I think Marshawn gets into the end zone twice today. I've been saying that all week. I hope he proves me right. At the wide receiver side, Antonio Brown, a consistent lock each and every week. If you're pairing him with Ben Roethlisberger, I think that's a strong tournament play. The chalk of the week, and maybe I'm wrong here, just because he's let a lot of people down as far as lack of touchdowns, but Julio Jones has to be on your team this week, right?
I think that changes this week. I think he's going to go in the end zone. I almost want to lock in two, but then it's the same thing. I mean, he's going to get the targets. He's going to have a huge week.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I actually think he's the #1 wide receiver in fantasy in week 6.
He's crushed Tampa Bay historically over the last several years of his career. I think this is the eruption game for Julio, and so I'm absolutely going to have full-on exposure to him in my fantasy sports markets lineup and my beat Ben. What about
Davante Adams? Davante Adams also, especially with the health issues that the Packers receivers are currently facing. I mean, they may not even play. Davante Adams is in such a great spot.
Yes, but I don't think I'm going to have him in my FSM lineup only because Green Bay should win this game handedly, and it was only Aaron Rodgers that went to him a ton when they were down in that game against Detroit. So I wonder if the Packers get off to a big lead, if it ends up becoming an Aaron Jones game, the game that we've been finally waiting for. So I have my reservations. I think Davante Adams is a fantastic play every week and season long. In daily, I'm probably off of him this week.
Right. No, understand, Ben. I totally get that.
Also, Tyler Boyd, another guy that I think has a really good opportunity for Cincinnati. And a game, you're right, that we really didn't talk about. But that's another game that I think you should absolutely have exposure to. And then finally, Fensty at the tight end spot. We talked about it before. We're both taking Gronk over Travis Kelce this week. The same reasons that we think Julio is about to have his blowout game that are the same reasons that we think Rob Gronkowski is finally going to play well. Kansas City doesn't have anybody to guard him. So going down the middle of the field with all the other options that New England has, this makes sense for Gronk to go nuts. The other tight ends that we absolutely believe are in play, Jordan Reed, because Alex Smith has nobody else to throw to this week in Washington. Eric Ebron has gotten peppered with targets so far when he's been the #1 guy in Indianapolis with no Jack Doyle. We talked about George Kittle. If he's healthy, go ahead and play him. But you like David Njoku as well this week. Anybody else we're missing?
Yes, and I'm locking this guy into every single one of my DFS lineups, especially on the salary sites. CJ Uzomah, and that is because no Tyler Kropp, John Ross not expected to play, no Tyler Eifert as well, no Gio Bernard. So like you love Tyler Boyd, there's more than enough to go around when it comes to Cincy. Uzomah, lock him in. Yeah. I'm thinking he's hitting that end zone.
CJ is a solid play, and again, if you're playing on the salary sites, it is very good value. Probably not a play for me on FSM, but I do think he gets into the end zone. I love that call.
Right, because that's non-salary. So yes, you're gonna go with Gronk and you're gonna go with Kelce. You're gonna go with those guys. But salary sites, and I'm seeing in DraftKings 3,000. I love that.
There you go, Fensty. Before we let you go, and I'll put that promo code on the screen one more time. NFL 18. $5 to play at fantasysportsmarkets.com. That is free money for you to be able to go and give us a try. It is non-salary-based DFS. Fensty, where can the good people find your show? Where can they find you on Twitter? Tell us what they need to know.
All right, you can find me on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio every single Saturday, hosting Wake Up Fantasy Sports 6 to 8 a.m. Eastern. But hey, if you like sleep, no problem. You can always catch it with SiriusXM's On Demand. FantasyAlarm.com, especially those who are playing in fantasy basketball, whether it's seasonal or DFS, I got you for basketball. Also, as well, besides that, you find me with Benny Heis every single week, whether it's Periscope, Facebook, Twitter, at Fensty Sports.
It's the place to be. Fensty, you're the best. Thanks for being a part of the show. Thank you to all of you guys on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, on Periscope for being a part of this. We will be back next Sunday, 10 a.m. East Coast time, 9 a.m. Central. Don't forget to watch our other live show, FSM College Football Live, with myself and Bossman Blake Follis, every Friday at 1 p.m. East Coast time, 12 p.m. high noon on Fridays, as we get you ready for the FSM Top 25 college football slate. Fantasy college football is just a part of what we do here, but fantasy football, that's the bread and butter, baby. This is where we go. For Fensty, I'm Ben. Thank you guys for watching. We will talk to you soon. Enjoy. Good luck in Week 6.
Win!